Hello, my name is Annie. Welcome to the Parkinson's Foundation Wellness Wednesday. What's happening in research during COVID-19? The mission of the Parkinson's Foundation is to make lives better for people living with Parkinson's. By improving care and advancing research today until there's tomorrow without the disease. In everything we do, we build on the energy, experience, and passion of the global Parkinson's community. Our virtual PD Health at Home programs, including Mindfulness Mondays, Wellness Wednesdays, and Fitness Fridays, are available to you. Today's session will be recorded and archived on the parkinson.org/pdhealth site. It is here so that you can find all the upcoming and past virtual programs and events. We have a lot to learn today, so let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce today's first speaker, Dr. Danielle Larson. Dr. Larson completed her neurology residency at Northwestern University, Feinberg School of Medicine, and recently completed her movement disorder fellowship at the Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorder Center. Dr. Larson, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to start by talking about the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on clinical research and on Parkinson's disease research in general. As you all are aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed our world drastically, and unfortunately, the healthcare community and the research community was not immune to this. After the COVID-19 pandemic really hit the US in March of this year, I would say the majority of clinical research, including Parkinson's disease research, had to be put on pause. There was many reasons for doing this, but the main reason for this was for the safety of our patients and research participants. So on the hospital or institutional side, all hospital-based or clinic-based visits were limited to essential visits. So that meant non-essential clinic visits and research visits were not conducted in order to ensure the safety of patients and research participants. And on the study sponsor side, so the individuals who are actually sponsoring clinical research, they also agreed with this in order to protect the safety of participants. So it was mandated on a research-wide level that all research activities should be paused. So with this change in research because of the COVID-19 pandemic, behind the scenes, a lot of research sites have been making changes in order to adapt. And one of the main changes has been transitioning from only doing in-person research visits to doing virtual research visits. And with this transition and this adaptation, there are a lot of logistical factors that needed to be adjusted in order to make this possible. So one factor has been the need for new forms. So traditionally in an in-person research visit, individuals fill out questionnaires or outcome measures are completed on paper forms. But during virtual visits, this needs to be done electronically via electronic data collection. So there needed to be a change from paper forms to electronic forms. Another factor that needed to be adjusted was the consent process. Typically, when participants agree to participate in research, they sign a consent form in person after talking to the physician and the research coordinator. But when this is done virtually, an individual can actually sign an electronic consent form on the computer while talking with the research coordinator and the physician about the consent process over the phone or over the video. So this need for electronic data collection and electronic consent forms, you obviously need the electronic equipment in order to complete this. And that includes computers, iPads, tablets, or iPhones. So research participants need to have access to this equipment, and so do research sites. And for some studies, the study sponsors are actually able to provide these electronic means to participants and to the research site in order to make these virtual visits feasible. Another barrier that can occur when thinking about virtual visits is that some states don't allow virtual visits to be conducted between participants or research sites across state lines. So this needs to be considered on a participant by participant basis. And then we obviously need to consider the security and the safety of the video conferencing platform that we are using. So even though a lot of these factors can be overcome and achieved in this adaptation to virtual visit process, there are some challenges that remain. One challenge is going through the regulatory approval process when transitioning from in-person research visits to virtual visits. So every research site has their own regulatory body called the Internal Review Board that approves research protocols to make sure that they're safe for participants. So in transitioning to virtual visits, this requires a new protocol that needs to be reviewed by this regulatory body, and this can take time and resources. So that means, unfortunately, it's not as easy as flipping a switch and all of a sudden being able to do virtual research. Another challenge is completing safety labs and safety monitoring during a research study. Traditionally, when in-person visits are done for research, participants might have their blood drawn or might have their vitals taken during a research visit to ensure the safety during the trial of a study drug or study treatment. But when visits are all virtual, this needs to be achieved at home. And this can be achieved at home if there are resources such as nurses able to come to the house to take the blood sample and do vital signs remotely. This can be particularly challenging for drug infusion studies where a study drug is administered via an IV. And that's because these are typically done in infusion centers where participants can be monitored. There is the possibility for these infusions to be done at home, but again, this requires resources and requires more oversight to ensure the safety of participants. So now that we've talked about different factors that need to be adapted in order to transition from in-person to virtual studies, I want to briefly talk about two studies that have been able to achieve this and that are have the option of being completely virtual. So one is the PEACE study, which is intervening early concerning employment. That's done out of the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab in Chicago. And this study is completely virtual in that the study visits are online or telephone surveys about every 6 months for 3 years. And that means there's actually no in-person visits. And over the course of this study, a research team monitors an individual's progress in an occupational setting. And there is contact information there if you are interested in participating in this virtual study. The second study is something you might be familiar with, which is PD-Gene or the PD generation study. And this is a genetic study looking for the common genes associated with Parkinson's. And this was traditionally an in-person research study, but it was recently approved for the option to be completely virtual. And if it's virtual, it would be one video visit, a saliva genetic sample that could be mailed in by the participant, and then one phone visit. And you can learn more about this at the PF programming on September 30th. So now that we've seen that it's feasible for research to move from in-person to virtual, we can see that there are benefits. So there are benefits to the participants, but also to Parkinson's research in general. So because virtual visits decrease the time and resource burden to participants, where they don't have to worry about potentially driving into the city and facing traffic and having somebody to take off work to help accompany them to the research visit. This really decreases the stress and travel burden for the participant, which is great for our participants. And it also encourages more people to potentially participate in the research in the first place, because if they don't have this burden to deal with, they might be more likely to participate in a research study. And this can definitely open it up to rural participants and people of ethnic or racial diversity that might otherwise be precluded by barriers of having to go to work or living in inconvenient places. This can also ultimately lead to study cost savings and a more efficient trial that can expedite the trial. So moving forward, we know that after the COVID-19 pandemic, there's probably integration of these virtual visits that are going to be here to stay because of the mentioned benefits to participants and the benefits to research. So that means that design and implementation of clinical trials will change to reflect this. I already commented on the ability to use remote consent to decrease participant burden. Also, to decrease overall participant burden, clinical trials might have a mix of virtual and in-person visits. We also need to make sure that our remote outcome assessments, so those done virtually, are validated, and we can start using more wearable technology and sensors to assess things such as the motor symptoms of Parkinson's or even cognition in Parkinson's. And again, this would decrease the overall in-person clinic visits that are needed. As we do this, we'll have to make sure that our research teams are trained in how to do virtual studies, both the logistics and the procedures, and we'll need to make sure that the virtual platforms we are using are safe and are secure for our participants.
Thank you so much, Dr. Larson. That was a great presentation, and I certainly learned a lot about what some of these benefits are and what some of the challenges are too, and pivoting from an in-person study rather to a virtual study. So thank you. All right, so now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Madeleine Hackney from the Emory University School of Medicine. So Dr. Madeleine Hackney is a research scientist with the Center for Visual and Neurocognitive Rehabilitation at the Atlanta VA. She's also an assistant professor in the Emory School of Medicine, Department of Medicine, Division of General Medicine and Geriatrics. Dr. Hackney, take it away.
Thanks so much, Annie. It's my great pleasure to be here today with all of you virtually. It's very exciting. And I appreciated Dr. Larson's presentation very much. It resonates a lot for me, especially in these last 6 months during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I hope that we can inspire some of you to consider some of the new options that we have for clinical research, many of which will probably be some hybrid of in-person and virtual offerings in terms of how we gather data and deliver interventions. I wanted to just talk to you today about how I've had to workshop in my own lab the delivery of our assessments and the delivery of our interventions. But I'll just start out with a little bit about who I am and what we do. So I'm Madeleine Hackney. I used to be a dancer, and then I became a movement scientist after I studied movement science at Washington University with Dr. Gammon Earhart. And I early on did some tango studies where we saw that adapted Argentine tango could improve balance in people with Parkinson's. Since then, I've done a lot of other things in Parkinson's, all related to understanding motor and cognitive and psychosocial function in people with PD and related disorders. In my lab, we do traditional stuff. We do blood draws. We do something called vascular imaging, where we image the vascular system so we can learn more about cardiovascular function. We also do functional fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging. We do task-based and structural, so we can learn about the brain and how it changes in response to both a condition like Parkinson's, as well as helpful interventions like exercise or movement or education. We also do traditional exercise lab-based assessments like finding someone's VO2 max, like the guy there in the bicycle, that he's getting his VO2 max. We're trying to figure out how much oxygen he can consume while he exerts his body a lot. So we do all these sorts of assessments that maybe the blood draw, if a nurse were able to go into someone's house, could be done sort of virtually, but otherwise we're still probably going to be requiring patients to come on into the clinic and see us. However, at Emory, for example, if you're getting an fMRI, you will be going through very strict procedures, and they do absolutely everything they can to maintain sanitation and make sure everyone's very safe if they go through a procedure like that. So I think you can rest assured that clinics all over the country are adopting new habits that are going to really, really make sure you're safe. Slide. I also do mobility, cognitive, and psychosocial behavioral measures. So basically I see how far someone can walk in 6 minutes. Or I ask them to do a cognitive test where they have to memorize a list, for example, of seemingly unrelated terms. Or I administer a multitude of different sorts of psychosocial questionnaires. So we try to find out about mood and about depression and about quality of life, these sorts of questionnaires. I'll say for the questionnaires, they have adapted quite well to a virtual environment because in many cases we were already able to do that. You can mail it to someone, or you could just simply send a link to a survey and voila. Folks these days are doing really well with the technology, and so that wasn't such a big problem. However, our mobility and cognitive measures meant, can you go back a slide, Annie? Thanks. Mobility and cognitive measures actually required a little bit more workshopping in terms of figuring out how the heck are we going to do this now, because we hadn't been traditionally doing it. But I will tell you a little bit about that journey. Next slide. Okay, the other things that we do in my lab are behavioral interventions for older adults with Parkinson's and sometimes with mild cognitive impairment. And we do educational programs. I have a program called Dreams, which Parkinson Foundation has supported over the last several years, which is an educational program to provide information about wellness, but also about the research process. We're very grateful to Parkinson's Foundation for all that support. And we also do dancing. We do adapted Argentine tango lessons, and we do walking groups and exercise groups. And these are fun, and they've always been in person with the exception of the education groups, which we do have in binder form, over the phone, and in podcast. However, dancing and walking do pose a bit of a problem, and we have to figure out how we can adapt them so that everyone is both safe and learning as much as they can, and that the interventions themselves remain efficacious. Slide. So yes, COVID-19 came around in late February. You start to hear the signs of it. And then in mid-March, yes, everything shut down in Atlanta. We shut down our schools, I think March 14th, and that was that. At that point, touch and close contact is not advised. And so we realized that it was very necessary that we would need to be converting our motor and our cognitive assessments to telehealth and convert our interventions to virtual delivery. I realized that this is what we're going to need to do. Everything that we could possibly convert, we would need to at least make an effort and try to do so. Slide. So to do this, we had to define parameters for what are we going to need to do in terms to make this work. And things like new inclusion and exclusion criteria were important. For motor assessments, we had to have more criteria for whether or not someone is going to be a fall risk. I cannot ask someone to stand on one leg in the corner with a video if they have a lot of freezing or if they're falling 5 times a week. This is not something that we can do. So we have to very carefully screen to see who is actually appropriate to receive a mobility assessment virtually. If it was a Parkinson's specific assessment, for example, that may not be appropriate. I know many neurologists wouldn't agree that you would administer the MDS-UPDRS, for example, virtually. We need to have an able-bodied person present to make sure that if something happened, we need someone there who could get help if needed or provide assistance. And of course, the individuals have to have access to technology. And some studies will be able to provide tablets and other resources, but in other studies, there may not be that. And so you have to make sure that someone has access to technology, but also to a Wi-Fi and that kind of thing. So these are all things that you have to now, more definition is necessary. And there's some new limitations. I already discussed them in terms of mobility assessments. Some of our mobility assessments we decided simply weren't going to work. If we wanted to see them doing gait speed across 20 feet, they would need that 20 feet within their home. And not everyone's going to have that a 20 feet, clear area that they can simply do and that we could get the camera space for. And then I already alluded to this, but some physical assessments, at least for our lab, we are continuing to do in person, including blood draws, fMRI, vascular imaging. We did learn, however, for a study that I do, which is called STEADY, we did learn that blood pressure could be done by telehealth. If you mail someone a cuff and the nurse can instruct you what to do, you're good to go. It's often valid. Slide, please. So what did we do? We had needed to consult experts. So we've consulted. I have my own expertise, certainly, but I go to my friends and colleagues to find out other things, like how can we do this as best we possibly can. In this case, it took a lot of heads. Putting a lot of heads together really helps us deliver, I think, a very good product. And that includes folks from geriatrics, obviously neurology, physical therapy, definitely our friends in neuropsychology and exercise science. They shared the best practices with us from the clinic. Neuropsychology, I noted, was especially quick to adapt to telehealth. Many cognitive assessments lend themselves well to virtual presentation. And they helped us create safety procedures for our mobility assessments in terms of determining who could do it and how we do it. And we developed standard operating procedures for all our procedures. So this is our telemotor working group discussion. We have weekly meetings. We have been having them. They continue right now because we are done with our phase of determining how to do our mobility assessments, but we're working through our interventions right now. We've had weekly meetings with a physical therapist who actually specializes in Parkinson's and in movement disorders in general, Dr. Amy Morris at Emory. She's amazing, and I'm so lucky to have her on my team, as well as Kevin Mamino, who has a lot of experience. He's an exercise physiologist, and he's been working with the VA for many years. For example, we were able to convert a very standard, very well used test called the timed up and go, which is that up in the top. You see they get up, they walk around a cone, go back, and they sit down. We can also do something called the 30-second chair stand, where they stand up and then sit back down as many times as they can in 30 seconds, and a 360-degree turn test. By placing a chair in a careful place, by putting people in a corner where they are not touching, but able to tap if they need to, we can safely administer tests like this and others in a virtual setting, provided they've fulfilled certain FALS criteria. And we've had a telecognitive working group. I've been very fortunate to work with Doctors Crossan and Goldstein, neuropsychologists with a vast array of experience. And they have devoted their time to this and have helped us tremendous in terms of figuring out how to troubleshoot different aspects of the administration of the virtual assessment, because it's not very simple, right? You have to have the script, you have to think of everything, like when do they go to full screen, when do we get to full view, and the sort of the things that you need to do to make sure it's a really valid assessment of their cognition. We also had to determine a whole new battery of assessments. We were going to look at certain domains, including executive function and visual spatial function and language and memory, but we had to figure out which assessments would be best for virtual delivery and which ones just weren't going to work. And through these discussions, we were able to come up with a good battery, I believe. Virtual walks, that's what we've been doing lately. The past few weeks, we've had some friends with Parkinson's joining us, and they have enjoyed the walk. We're trying to troubleshoot and figure out how can we deliver a walking group, essentially, but they're going to be on their phones with headset in, of course, hands-free, phone in the fanny pack or some sort of clip or something like that. And it's what happens as they walk, the instructor will be delivering cues on the phone, step big, keep your chest up, head back, etc. All the good cues that you might have heard from your own physical therapist about how you should walk, but it'll be in real time. You'll be hearing that individual as you're doing your walk. It starts with a warm up delivered over video, and then you would leave your home and go for your walk. We're working through kinks like, how do we get the Zoom link just right? If you're also using a Map My Walk device, an app that will tell you like how far you've gone, that has to work with your phone too on Zoom. It gets a little bit complicated. So we're figuring out how can we give instructions so to make it as seamless and as easy and as enjoyable and efficacious as possible. We're also learning how to convert our dance classes, Adapted Tango, to a virtual environment as well. That is something that we're just starting to do. I know we can do it, but we'll also be having in-person classes as well. Masks will be used, lots of PPE if we get together for sure. And it'll be interesting, this particular journey, but I know we'll get there. I just want to tell you a little bit about the details about the technology and the process, although Dr. Larson talked a lot about that already, but I'll just quickly say a few more things. So we have to think about the video conference software. So we're using Zoom mostly for our research purposes. It might be institution dependent. There's a lot of other great platforms that work really well. The VA uses a lot of other ones, WebEx, for example. We have to consider things like privacy and password protection and ease of use and the standardization, of course, within our organization. We have to think about HIPAA compliance. That's, we're now using technology, and the privacy issue is something that really demands a lot of conversation, and it takes a bit of thought to get through that as well. And we have to think about what are the best practices and work with people directly. We worked with about 20 or so patients, not even patients, practice participants who devoted their time to help us into figuring out how we could deliver our STEADY project, which is a fall risk assessment. And through that, we were able to figure out, things about how do you continue to communicate through nonverbal body language? What should the position of the camera be? If you want to get a particular angle, where do you tell them to get those angles just right? We're all becoming directors of photography now, which is the term that you use for the main person who directs what you're going to see on any sort of movie or film. We've all become that individual. And we have to really fine tune our instructions. What we do have is like a technology setup call prior to anyone's assessment, where an individual walks the participant through what camera angles we need and how to clear the space and to really prepare for that experience. And now I'm going to just tell you about a couple of studies that do have virtual options that I am directing. So this is the paired study. This is funded by the VA, and it's called Partner Dance Aerobic Exercise and Neuroprotective Motor and Cognitive Intervention in Parkinson's Disease. A co-investigators is Dr. Dan Huddleston and also Dr. Joe Nocera. We call it paired for short. Every study needs a good short acronym. So this one's paired. And we are inspired by this because we think different types of exercise may improve patient perception of their medication effectiveness, meaning how well are your medications, your anti-Parkinsonian medications, working out. A lot of patients report something called off time, and we want to do something about that. I think there might be a nice relationship between exercise or different types of exercise and medication effectiveness, and that's what this study is designed to uncover. We also have seen some information that's showing that exercise can slow neurodegeneration, and so we're actually doing a study to see if that's actually the case. We have some wonderful MRI procedures that will tell us a bit about whether or not that's the case. This is a 16-month study. And the overall goal is to examine the effects of walking versus partner dance on off time, rates of brain degeneration, and spatial cognition in particular, which you think has a strong relationship to anything movement related. Remote options will be available in that we are requiring 20% of all dance lessons or walking lessons to be delivered in person. But of course, we'll be using lots of PPE and we'll adhere to all the strict recommendations in terms of social distancing. And then a good 80% can be virtual. So we hope folks are interested and maybe be able to participate. COVID public safety measures will be strictly followed during any all-person visits. So we're going to answer with this particular study, which is better PDAE, which is a fancy way to say a partner dance, or walking, or lessening off time and spatial cognition, and slowing down brain cell death. And this study is going to be using cutting edge imaging techniques to see if dance or walking are helpful for slowing brain cell death. And this project happens to combine patient-centered clinical science and mechanistic aims to improve healthcare. And it's for veterans and non-veterans. And this is the DREAMS program. This is fully virtual, so anyone can participate around the country. It involves interactive 8-week at-home telehealth education programs involving weekly readings and recordings designed to increase caregiving mastery. So we're especially targeting caregivers out there. It also involves a weekly phone call from study staff for coaching on strategies to improve caregiving mastery. It would involve two remote assessment visits with Emory University researchers. So that's before you would begin the 8-week program and after. You would be compensated for your time, sponsored by the Parkinsons Foundation and the Roybal Center at Emory. And that's the contact information there. And I'll tell you a little bit more about DREAMS. It's about, short for Developing Research, Education, and Advocacy for Multicultural Seniors. We have Dream On, which is still for people with Parkinson's, and Dreaming Together is more for caregivers. And as I said, they're totally remote, and it's an empowerment program, and I hope y'all have some interest. And thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hackney. That was so interesting. And being here in the same area as you, I've actually had the opportunity to visit with Dr. Hackney and some of her research assistants and staff. So you guys are doing amazing work. So thank you for being here and for sharing a little bit more about what you guys are doing. So now, and we will, I know this has been a lot of information, so I just want everyone to know that we'll not only be sharing the recording of today's presentation, but we'll also be sharing the slides from today's presentation. So we'll be sending those out via email, probably early next week. So look out for that. All right, so now that we've talked a little bit more about how some of these research studies are transitioning to virtual platforms, and we've heard some specific examples of how Madeleine and her team are accomplishing that at Emory, we really want to pivot now to Denise Coley. Denise Coley is a Parkinson's Foundation research advocate. She's also a newly selected member of the People with Parkinson's Advisory Council. And Denise is fantastic and is a great example of someone who's really taking charge of her Parkinson's and doing as much as she can to further the research that's happening. So Denise, take it away.
Thank you very much, Annie. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk to each person this morning or this afternoon, depending on your location. As most people know, Parkinson's was discovered in 1817 and is still going on. So Parkinson's disease did not stop because COVID-19 has hit. We need to continue to research and fight for better outcomes. Next slide. So why is it important as a patient to participate in clinical trials? There are several things that I look at. One is to get a better understanding of what treatments are available and what are the non-medical impacts. So being an active participant with researchers, with companies that are developing products, giving input from a Parkinson patient perspective and expectations will make it better for everybody. And looking at how you test medicine, effectiveness across different populations according to age, gender, race, and ethnicity. So there are many opportunities for everyone to participate to look at how we can have quality of life and also making sure that there's patient engagement. And we look at this as really important for the patient because it's a full body disease, the care partners and the family and the community because they're affected by the disease. So getting involved anywhere in the research cycle will make a big difference for those who come after us who have Parkinson's. Next slide, please. So a little bit about my search. When COVID hit in March, I wanted to continue to be active in research, and I wanted to make sure that I found as many opportunities through virtual trials and virtual studies. And I found several, and I'd like to take some time to share with you so that if you're looking for trials or studies virtually, you can tap on some of these. The first one I'm going to talk about is PD Gene, the nickname for PD generation. And this is a first of a kind initiative that provides genetic testing for those who have been confirmed with a Parkinson diagnosis. And then you can either go to the center if you're not in shelter in place, but if you're in shelter in place, they have pivoted to a new way where you can do a telemedicine appointment and a home cheek swab. And I'm one of the first people who is going through the process with Columbia University. It's very easy to do. You can do it in the comfort of your home, and you can have a great impact on future generations as well as this generation. Next slide, please. The next trial I want to talk about is the PARC study. The PARC study is a virtual opportunity to look at an application, and I always get excited by this because we all go in and we have to do the hand and we have to do the oohs and the ahs, and we had to stand and sit. So the PARC study captures all this on technology, so you can do this anywhere at any time with your computer and webcam. I found it fascinating. I loved it so much. I played around with it, and it's a nice activity to go through, but it gives valuable information to the researchers. But for me as a Parkinson patient, it was just amazing to see how technology can be used to capture some things that we have in in-office visits. Next slide. So I went and I looked for virtual studies. I thought that when I look at research, if I can partake in research that goes over a period of time, capturing different qualities, exercise, diet, whatever that they're looking through, maybe in doing that, they'll find some core similarities or core differences that can help for future studies, future medication, future trials. So I selected 3 to participate in. I'll start with the first one, which is just a quick one that is only once, and it's the patient-reported outcomes called PRO-PDE. It's a self-rating scale. You go through and answer the survey, and it correlates your quality of life and your existing scales of disease severity. I found that fascinating, so I thought I would share that one with you. The other 2 are longer term, so you are giving information each year in different sequences. The first one is Fox Insight, and this is a clinical study building on a large group of Parkinson patients, and they're age-matched control volunteers, and they research what you're doing in the community and gives critical insight into your experiences in genetics and variability of the Parkinson's disease. And I think the cadence for this is every 6 weeks, but it's more frequent. And then there might be some interim trials that they'll say, would you like to tell us about COVID or something of that nature? So I feel that participating in a long-term study, you're giving more information and seeing your progression over the years. The next trial study that I did was the complementary and alternative medicine care in Parkinson, which is called CAMCARE and PD. And this is a 5-year program, and I believe it's every 6 months. You get a study to provide information on your diet, your lifestyle, and hopefully to find out why some people fast track through Parkinson's disease and why some people progress at a slower progression. This is a very interesting one, and I'm glad to participate to see what the outcome is. Next slide. So why? are we doing this research during COVID-19, pivoting to telemedicine, virtual studies, virtual trials, and surveys. From my experience, what was working in the virtual environment is non-invasive testing. I can do it in the comfort of my home. Anybody can have full access as long as you have a computer. You can fit it according to your schedule, so you don't have to worry about time differences. You don't have to get on transportation, so depending on what stage of Parkinson's you're in, how difficult it might be to get to the transportation issues, you can do it at home. And it's convenient. So I really appreciated the studies that I found that allowed that. The one thing that I will encourage everyone to do is that you can always be proactive looking for it. You don't have to wait for it to come. You can always talk to your physician to ask, do they know of any trials, and search the internet on a regular basis. Sometimes if you look at the differences between the in-person visit versus the virtual environment is when you're in person, you had to worry about traffic, you had to worry about scheduling and timing, you had to worry about when to take your medicine, and parking and transportation issues. With the virtual environment that we have right now during COVID, that erases all of those challenges, and it goes back to more of the convenience factor. Some of the tips that I have learned is ask questions about the research. What is it that you're trying to obtain? I was looking during this period for something that was easy, convenient, that I could do it in my home, use the technology either through telemedicine, telesurveys, or virtually or online. You also need to ask, is it one time only or a series of times? If it's a series of times, what are the expectations? Do I have to take medicine at a certain time? Can I eat regularly? Will I have a chance to get up and walk and exercise? And then clarify what time zone you're working on if you're doing one that you're going to be interacting with another person, because that will also limit what time that you'll put aside to do it. There's always so many different time zones, so always ask about that time zone. And then discuss your expectations. What do you want to have out of it? What you want to learn? Are you participating to give information in a survey or app or a web? Or are you there to give information on the process, how it impacts not only yourself, but other Parkinson patients, and what are the limitations that you see? So my lessons that I've learned is check for the clinical trials of interest to you, but as you're doing that, you'll probably find some others that come up. And then talk to the researcher if they allow that, and then determine if this is the right trial for you, or maybe it's something you want to let somebody else know about. And be familiar with the technology and Zoom. Most of the programs use Zoom or a web-based enabled application. So be familiar and be comfortable. And then make sure you have the proper headset for soft voice. I have a soft voice, and through this journey, I've learned to get a boom mic headset, which I'm wearing today, so that I can be heard. Next slide. So in ending, I'd like to highlight 3 areas for people who are looking for research. Go to clinicaltrials.gov, Michael J. Fox Trial Finder, and the NIH clinical research trials. These are 3 avenues where you can go searching for trials depending on what your interest is. And then most importantly, I always believe that contact the Centers of Excellence, contact your university research department, contact the various neurology departments around the US, because there are many more these institutions that are doing virtual trials, as you've heard of, virtual studies, and telemedicine. And you can request to be on their list for upcoming studies. So then you don't have to always go looking for studies. You can have studies pushed to you, and you can select the ones that are of interest to you, that you have time for you, and that will meet your needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Denise. That was wonderful. And Denise, while we're getting our other presenters on for our final Q&A session, would you mind telling the group today a little bit more about your role as a research advocate?
Yes, I attended PAIR, which is Parkinson patients and research. And we go through a process to be trained to be a certified researcher. It's a great experience. You go and have training for, I think it was 2 to 3 days. You meet with researchers, you meet with caregivers, you meet with patients and advocates in the industry. When you do this, you can then go and talk to researchers, help them as they're looking at what the research study is going to be. You can probably be in the front end to give your input about what is important to Parkinson patients. You can also participate in trials and studies of different organizations, researchers and pharmaceuticals and biotech companies to talk about what you're finding in terms of artificial intelligence, what the studies are doing, the timing this cause. There's so much input that you can give and so many questions that can be answered by those who are going through the process because they want to make something that's applicable to all of us as Parkinson patients and caregivers. And by putting caregivers and patients and the pair program, we're active participants to try to make it better for our outcomes for all of the patients and caregivers and communities now and moving forward to the future.
That's great. Thank you so much, Denise. And thank you for all the work that you do on a daily basis to help further some of these initiatives. It's really amazing. So we have a few other questions for some of our other presenters. Danielle, I'm gonna throw this one at you. What are some of the factors? I know you kind of talked about, some of the reasons why in-person studies were no longer able to be in person. So what are some of the major factors, if you could reiterate those, that will determine when you think some of this in-person research can resume? Will it be determined based on vaccine, based on, safety to be in a clinic? What are some of those things that you think will be considered?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when research can resume for a specific study definitely depends on the hospital or the institution that's doing the research, what city they're in, is COVID-19 under control, relatively under control in that city? Has the hospital said that it's safe to resume clinic visits, and is it safe to resume research visits? So for example, where we are at Northwestern, we didn't get the okay to resume some in-clinic and in-clinic research visits until the beginning of July. So June, July. So it took that much time where, safety was the main priority and remains the main priority, but it was deemed like not safe to come in for a research visit. So as we look forward and look towards, the winter and what's next with the pandemic, it will just remain, I think, on a hospital and city by city basis, what is deemed safe. And we're all hoping for that vaccine to ensure the safety and continued ability to have in-person visits.
Great. All right. Dr. Hackney, this one is for you. It sounds like, you guys have done an amazing job of really pivoting to this new virtual platform for research studies. I know you talked a little bit about, the technology and being able to participate. Would you say that having home technology, having a device is really a prerequisite for participating in these studies? Is that something that your lab ever provides to participants?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. It's a really important one too. To make sure that everyone can participate, I think if a study can provide the technology, then it will try to. But that's a matter of the funder and the overall budget of the study and other factors. BA, for example, has actually been at the forefront of providing technology to people who participate in studies. It's not across the board, it's not for every study, but if it can, and if it's about that, if it's about telehealth in particular, I know that smartwatches have been, it's always loaning, of course, but they've been delivered to homes, and iPads and other forms of technology. And so, yeah, that's definitely something that is important to do, and you can often try to write that up in your grant to make sure that that is there, especially if you're interested in working with underserved populations, for example, those with less access. Another model from the VA, as a matter of fact, is this clinical community-based outpatient clinics where people can go, if they can't do something right in their home, they could go to a clinic. That would, of course, be safe. I mean, that would negate the desire, I guess, to stay at home, but that is a way that they have done that in the past, where there's been clinics that have the telehealth capabilities. So those are a couple of different ways to do things. But yeah, I think researchers will be writing that into their budget more and more, because it's very important to have everyone participate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, certainly we want to find more and more ways to reach every community, not just those who have access to devices and technology. So it sounds like even if you don't have a home computer or even Wi-Fi, I mean, I think a good idea is still to reach out to, your neurologist, to our helpline at the Parkinson's Foundation to try to find a virtual opportunity where maybe they would lend you the equipment. So that's great. All right, Denise, so I'm going to ask you another question. I know that even before COVID happened, I know clinical research is not something that everyone thinks is for them. I know people have questions and concerns about what does that mean, and what is really my role in clinical research. So as a research advocate, if you are talking to somebody and they are unsure as to whether they should participate in research, how do I find out if a particular study or trial is really right for me?
I'm going to answer that in two parts. The first thing is, for a Parkinson patient, participation really helps you in the future. If you participate, medicine can be delivered that will help everybody, the more people that are in the mix. The second part is, if you are participating, you can tell what's working, what's not working, and that's very important. The third part is that everyone should try to look at clinical trials. You can either do something that's non-invasive, such as a survey, or you can try the virtual or online. And then there are more advanced things where they're trying out different medicines. So it just depends on the person who's there. So I would encourage everyone to think of what is important to you, what impacts your life, and what would you like to make a difference in, and then go to those three links of Fox trials, NIH, and clinical trials to see if you can find a research study that tweaks your interest. For instance, Madeleine talked about dreams. I'm going to go back and look up dreams so I can see what I can do and my husband from a caregiver and a patient. So I think it's just fabulous. You learn so much by participating and listening to webinars and podcasts. And so that's where it begins. And you can start very simply with a survey with that PD Pro, and then look at something like dreams and some of the other I had mentioned today.
Well, and Denise, thank you too for providing your contact information and for being available to people on the webinar today who might have questions that they could ask you specifically. Denise mentioned a few other resources, and again, I'll mention our Parkinson's Foundation helpline, 1-800-4PD-INFO. Our helpline staff is fabulous, and they can answer questions about ongoing clinical opportunities, research opportunities as well. And help you, decide which ones might be right for you. Okay, so Danielle, I'm going to kick it back over. Dr. Larson, I'm going to kick it back over to you. And this is a question that we received, and somebody who was newly diagnosed, and their adult children are really, concerned and looking for ways to sort of help their loved one. Do you think that research studies, before COVID, during COVID, typically look for non-Parkinson's participants in addition to those who have Parkinson's?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I think if I'm understanding it correctly, the family members are asking if there's something that they could do to participate in research.
Exactly, yes.
Yes. So there are definitely research studies that want the involvement of family members, and what what we call quote unquote healthy controls. So in research, in order to determine if a new medication or new intervention is effective for Parkinson's disease, we also sometimes have to compare that to what it does in healthy controls. So you can enroll in research as a healthy control, but there are also studies. There's a specific study actually called the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative that is launching a second, it's been around for 10 years now, but it's kind of launching a second wave where they're actually looking specifically for family members of first-degree relatives with Parkinson's disease to be enrolled in that study. And it's a long-term study where they would ask you questions and you would have visits. I think it's about once a year you would have the visit. And that's to try to help understand what it looks like for family members of people with Parkinson's disease and for healthy controls.
That's great. And would you say, I mean, I know Denise mentioned some of these resources, but clinicaltrials.gov, I believe, and this can be for any of you guys, I believe you can filter by, you know, whether you have Parkinson's or don't have Parkinson's, and you can filter by location. That's correct. Mm-hmm. Great. Wonderful. All right. So we just have time for one or two more questions. Denise, what would you say, and this might be difficult for you to answer, what would you say has been your most rewarding research opportunity, experience, and why?
I will answer it as there are several research studies that I participated in, and the outcome and what I found most valuable was that I was there before, during, and after to provide input on my learnings as opposed to just participating in the trial. I always look at, when I go to any trial or study, what impact can I give back to help it be better for the next round or something they might want to consider for future things. So that is probably the most rewarding aspect I have found in many of the studies I've participated in.
That's great. All right. Well, Dr. Hackney, we're going to close things out with you. And I know we've touched on this throughout the various presentations, but you know, if you were going to leave people with, you know, with some, I guess, just words of wisdom, you know, how important is it to keep these studies going through COVID? You know, how important is it to keep them going rather than to put them on hold? What would you want to leave people with today?
Oh my goodness, it's just
pressure.
There's a lot of longitudinal studies that are going on, studies that have been going on for years, and we definitely don't want to halt those studies. The thing is that, remember, if you want things to get better, someone like you has to participate in research, and that's the way it is. And that hasn't changed because of COVID-19. We are doing everything we absolutely can to make sure it's a safe process. And the IRB and all the review boards are looking at this, and a lot of minds have been coming together to figure out how to deal with this particular puzzle. And so you can rest assured that the trials that you'd see on clinicaltrials.gov or the trials through Fox Finder, they're going to be a good experience. So please keep in mind that we want things to get better in terms of health and function throughout a lifetime. And we really need everyone to participate. So please consider it.
Well, thank you so much. That concludes the Q&A portion of today's program. We just want to thank our presenters so much for being here today, and just have a few additional announcements before you go. But today's session, as I mentioned earlier, has been recorded. It will be archived on the Parkinson's Foundation website at parkinson.org/pdhealth. It's here that you can also find all upcoming Parkinson's PD Health at Home programs, including Mindfulness Mondays, Wellness Wednesdays, and Fitness Fridays. If you did have a question today that was not answered, please know that we do provide free resources, including our website, parkinson.org, our educational book series, our webinars, podcasts, our hospital safety kit called Aware and Care, and our toll-free helpline, which is 1-800-4PD-INFO. And last but not least, we hope you'll join us for next week's PD Health at Home programs, including our Mindfulness Monday and our Wellness Wednesday program, where we'll actually examine the use of fitness trackers in Parkinson's research and how they may help refine treatment approaches for people with Parkinson's and the experience of individuals participating in studies. So until then, we thank you for joining us and hope you continue to stay well.